Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Eric Pierre-Jean, the CEO of JEC, or JEC. I hope you had a great first day yesterday, for the first day of JEC World, and I wish you, of course, today a super Wednesday. Hello to those who are watching this on replay on the web TV. I hope you will enjoy the session. JEC World is the leading event of composite materials. Why? Because we have the leading companies exhibiting and attending JEC World, but also because we have the leaders of this industry with us today. Leaders who have a deep understanding of the industry. Leaders who have a vision for the future of the industry. Leaders who have a point of view on the industry. One of them is with us today, and it's a great honor to welcome him on stage for this View from the Top session at JEC World. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to introduce the Chairman and President of Huntsman Corporation, Mr. Peter Huntsman. Good morning, Peter. Stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind invitation to be here. I hope that a couple of things that I shall be talking about today will be a bit controversial. I'll try to end my remarks early so that we can have some Q&A and any comments that you might have. So I'd like to jump right into what do we see in Huntsman. What do we see in Huntsman as a global view, because we cannot simply take Europe in isolation. It is important that we look at Europe as being an important component in the global economy. It is through Europe's innovation, through Europe's technology, through Europe's system of education, and a culture of being able to solve problems that over the last 100 years has brought the world into a much better place than it otherwise would have been. So I'm here to advocate for a strong Europe, for a strong European economy. And I only believe that this can happen if Europe has an effective, strong, and competitive energy policy that allows us to manufacture at competitive rates on a global basis and allows our raw materials to be competitive on a global basis. So I would like to express some of my concerns of what I see on a macro basis, and then I would also like to express some of the optimism that I feel and why I believe that the future for Europe is going to continue to be very strong if we're able to focus in the right areas. First of all, some areas of opportunity and some areas of concern. So as we look at the European deindustrialization, we are seeing a rapid decline over the course of the last 4 years. I want to be very clear. You can see that this is the impact of COVID, and even before COVID, and particularly after COVID, we have seen a deindustrialization. This is Germany. There are parts of Europe that are growing faster, and there are parts that are falling quicker. But these are the statistics, and as we look at some of the broader areas of BASF, of Covestro, the steel industry, the concrete industry, the glass industry. When we think of glass, we shouldn't just think of the automotive industry, but also the high-tech industry, the chip industry, and the components that are going to be going into computing and so forth. This is a trend that longer term, particularly in the last 6 to 9 months, is going to be very challenging to reverse. The money that is not being spent in Germany and Europe today is the capacity that Europe will need 5 and 10 years from now to compete effectively. I want to make sure that we understand that. When these industries leave, They rarely come back. As we think about the successes that we have read about over the course of the last 2 years, we have read that the greening of the European economy has allowed a 10% drop in energy consumption. This is being looked at many to be a positive step. But the biggest reason that we see for energy is deindustrialization. 80% of the drop in energy consumption has come about because industry is leaving, and industry is not consuming the electricity. This is not a successful policy. A successful policy is when you can have competition. This is not competition. This is simply people leaving the market, and in many cases, industry is moving to an area that has no regulation, no taxation, and it has very limited labor regulations as well. So this is a missed opportunity as I see it. What are we seeing from a market point of view? The earnings of the average European chemical companies, and when I look at steel, when I look at major industrial components, it is even worse. What are we seeing? Roughly about a 10% to 15% decrease in the value of a dollar that is earned in the same industry for the same products. A dollar that is earned in the United States is typically valued in the market value of a company, a total enterprise value of the company of about 10 to 15% higher, meaning that investors are seeing better long-term prospects in an economy that has sound energy policy, sound raw material policies. Again, this is something that we've seen that has started in 2020, and as we get to the end of 2023, I was looking for data for the first quarter of 2024, and I'm seeing an even wider convergence of this, a wider separation of this that is taking place. I wanted to emphasize to you the importance as we look at the freight rates on a global basis. Now, I'm using here a product that is a Huntsman product. The largest commodity product that we produce is polyurethane. This is the seating. If you have a BMW or a German-built automobile, chances are you're seated on Huntsman material. The dashboard, the materials inside of the car, home insulation, foam insulation to conserve energy and so forth. These are Huntsman polyurethane raw materials. As we look at basic commodity products that are moved around the world, typically you have a $500 a ton freight rate from China, Japan, South Korea to the European market. You typically have about a $350 per ton freight rate from Texas to Europe. Basically around $300 a ton from the Middle East into Europe. Now these prices are going to fluctuate. They're going to vary, times of conflict. They will go up and down, but on average, this is what we see. When we look at our manufacturing costs, same technology, same capacity, same product, China, United States, and Europe. You'll see in 2019, our costs are very flat, region to region. As a matter of fact, in 2019, our cheapest area of production was not the United States, where we have cheap natural gas. It was not China, where we have energy from coal. It was in Europe, 2019. By 2022, there was the widest divergence we have seen in history between Europe, United States, and Asia. You could take product almost by truck from China to Europe and still make money. Do we understand the trends that are taking place here? This is a loss to European competitiveness. The United States does better with competition. China does better with competition. The world needs a strong Europe. As we look into the energy challenge, I've had the opportunity through CEFIC and also individually to meet with various politicians across Europe. I'm not advocating an end to the Green New Deal. We are simply advocating for reality. And as we look at the energy challenges of today, where does our electricity come from? The preponderance of global electricity continues up through 2022, the end of 2022. 2023, these numbers are even worse. The preponderance of global energy is coming from coal, as you'll see from the very top. Natural gas, hydropower, nuclear, wind, solar, crude oil, and bioenergy. This is fine, except for the fact that this is electricity. This is not energy. If we're going to start eliminating crude oil and we're going to start eliminating gasoline, those are forms of energy. Electricity is a form of energy. So as we look at the total balance of energy on a global basis, this is what we see up to the end of 2022. Biomass, coal, oil. Again, if we're going to be looking at eliminating oil, you have to replace that energy, that propulsion means, with something else. Natural gas, nuclear, hydro. You see the blue at the very top? The very, very top. That's wind. Huntsman makes money from wind. I am not anti-wind. I wish the entire world would buy millions of blades. This is the profit-making area for us. But I have to be realistic as well. For every windmill that you have that operates about 30-35% on land, about 40% offshore, for every wind blade you have, you need to have 100% backup. Coal, natural gas, perhaps nuclear. Nuclear is harder to start up and shut down. But any process, as you know, when you're not operating the process, you're still paying for your fixed costs. Your capital costs, you're still paying your associates. These are standby facilities. So when we look at the reality of replacing this, how's it going to be replaced? And where is it going to be replaced? It's not just a question of saying we want more wind. I think that would be great. I think that would be great if we had more solar as well. But we have to be cognizant of the overall areas around the competitiveness of these decisions that we're making. As we think about the usage of coal on a global basis, I personally believe that the chemical industry will be very instrumental in replacing coal, both by energy efficiency and by the promotion of natural gas, something that is much cleaner than the unabated burning of coal. This is what we see in the consumption of coal on a global basis over the last 20 years. Pretty flat. The blue line behind me is China. 2021, 2022, China for the first time became the sole country that consumed more coal than the rest of the world combined. That's quite a feat. Do I tell the Chinese they should be changing their policy? The Chinese want energy security. They do not want to be reliant on Russia. They do not want to be reliant on Qatar. They do not want to be reliant on the United States. What is the source of Chinese domestic energy? It's coal. China is building a coal-burning power plant, electrical facility every 3 days. They're in the process right now of starting up more coal. Now, if we look at the targets that have been set by the United Nations and by the EU, the blue line is the amount of global coal that is being consumed. In order to hit these targets by 2030, that's where we need to be with global coal. Next year will be a record amount of coal consumed globally, 2025. My question is not if this is good or bad, but is it realistic to think that this number that is going to increase in 2025, that we have any chance of hitting this number here? You literally would have to shut down all of the coal-burning energy facilities across China and about 50% of what's left in the rest of the world in the next 5 years. This is impossible. It is theoretically, physically impossible. Now, is it a problem to have a goal that is here and we hope to be able to hit here? I suppose so, but that's not what we're doing. We literally are regulating as though there is going to be a realistic target here that there simply is just no way of hitting. And when I talk to policymakers and I point this out, all that I get is we need to work together. That is not a solution to these things. When I look at the Energy Information Agency, these are the projections that we have right now for oil, natural gas, and coal consumption. You don't need to be able to look at all the numbers. Look at the trend on all of these. Where are we right now? Right now, we're right here. We have no means of picking up the source of energy on any of these things. There's not enough wind capacity going in. There's not nearly enough wind capacity going in. As a matter of fact, the raw materials that we supply into the wind industry, comparison to 5 years ago, is actually slowing down and diminishing. There's actually less capacity that's going into the wind as we look at over the next 5 years and what has been built in the past 5 years. Again, I want to emphasize, I am not anti-wind. I'm trying to be realistic here as far as what is going to be needed when we talk about a drop-off of energy. Is the world truly going to be using 70-75% less power? Is a developing world just going to go without over the course of the next 5 or 10 years? It would be great if we had some solutions here, but to be honest with you, I'm not seeing a whole lot of them. Because of time, I'm going to jump through some of these other slides quite quickly. One of the challenges that we meet when we think about battery technology, in order to have wind to become and solar to become more effective, we need to have mass battery scale. It needs to be brought up on a scale of up to 50 to 100 times, not percent, times greater than we're seeing today. Today, we're seeing the average on a yearly basis equivalency of 7,000 pyramids. Pyramids the size of what we saw in Egypt. 7,000 of those. That's how much ore is required on a yearly basis right now. In order to meet the most basic objectives, the mining industry will have to grow at a rate of 800% over the course of the next decade. That 7,000 pyramids of ore needs to be raised to 50,000 pyramids. Is this feasible? Is it possible? Do the indigenous populations where many of these mines are going to be built, do they even want these mines? Where are the mines being built in the United States? They're being built in the Western Rockies, some of the most valuable real estate in the United States. You've heard of places like Aspen, Colorado, the great ski resorts and so forth. Those ski resorts used to be gold mines. Are we going to tear those areas up and make mines out of them? I don't think so. It's not realistic. The United States government isn't even giving permits for these mines. Are you going to start tearing up the Alps, mining the Alps for their minerals? I don't think so. So where are we going to go for these? 800% greater capacities. When you look at the mines, the amount of ore that's coming out of the world right now and where that ore is coming from the basic products of copper, nickel, cobalt, rare earth, and lithium. Again, these are your raw materials that are going to be needed for this new world of batteries. Remember, this is where you're digging the hole. This is where you're processing the materials. To process mining materials, you need two things. You need very toxic, harsh chemistry, and you need a great deal of power, very inexpensive power. Power that's coming from coal. You look at the largest refining areas where these ores are refined, you'll see, first of all, it's mostly taking place in China, and it's taking place in an area that has huge amounts of coal, very cheap coal, and there's your cheap power. I question if we really look at the CO2 balances on these life cycles, because much of what is consumed in energy in China is a state secret. You don't simply just get on the internet and see how much CO2 is being produced with these mines and the refineries that are processing this. This is not public information. You can see from satellite photos the massive amounts of coal that are being consumed in these areas. But oftentimes, credits will be given. We're taking wind energy from this area of the country and we're using it over in this area of the country when we look at the output of the mines. That's not happening. That's simply not realistic. When I look at some of the large consumers of the petrochemical industry, I believe that we would be very well served if we could at least speak out and talk about a dose of reality. This is a recent article from the FT where the CEO of Lego said that Lego, you're all very familiar with this toy company. My grandchildren use thousands of pieces of Lego. Here's the CEO of Lego saying that they took 2 years and they were looking for a replacement for plastics. Imagine this, a replacement for plastics. Look at the quote up here. We thought it would be easier to find a magic material. Magic. We're looking for a magic material? That's going to be the solution for the petrochemical industry? Oh, and they didn't find a magic material. They're still using the same raw materials in Lego because it's the best, most economical, most recyclable product that is produced. We think about the fuel industry that's going into the aviation. Here's what Lufthansa recently said. The CEO of Lufthansa said, we would need around half of Germany's electricity to create enough of the fuels. I don't think Mr. Habeck, the economic minister, will allow half of the electricity generated in Germany today would be needed just for the electrolysis process. And that's going from the electricity that will be required to produce green hydrogen to be able to produce the aviation fuel that some governments are actually mandating to have in place within 5 years. Again, this is simply not realistic. The processes aren't even being built, let alone the capacities. Matter of fact, if you draw these to their logical conclusion, if we look at the electrical demand from the steel industry, again, this is going to be to have an arc capacity in the steel industry. We do away with the coal. We look at the demand for electricity that will be coming for EVs, and then you look at the demand for electricity in the chemicals industry. Again, this is the electricity that will be needed to electrolyze and to make green hydrogen. This goes into ammonia, or it can go into urea, it can go into your basic fertilizers. feeding half the world's population. It can also be used as a basic raw material for the chemical industry. Now, the problem with this, and why aren't we doing this today, is because it's prohibitively expensive, very expensive. And these are the raw materials, by the way, that go into virtually 100% of the composites. All these products that we see out here, that's the chemical industry. Again, just going from reality. Now, this is what Accenture said. We would need either an area the size of Spain covered in windmills. Covered in windmills, the entire area the size of Spain covered in windmills. And you need the associated batteries to go with this, by the way, because it's only working a portion of the time. Or you need an area the size of Ireland covered in solar panels. Or the easiest one, you need to build simply 836 nuclear power plants. Okay, I don't think any of those three are going to take place. I'm not even sure that a combination of those three. We're in the process in most of the world of shutting down nuclear power plants. We're not looking at how to rebuild the nuclear industry. We looked at really building out the nuclear industry in the 1950s. Remember, well, many of you weren't alive then. I wasn't alive. President Dwight Eisenhower in the United States, Atoms for Peace. It's a program to build over 800 nuclear facilities all over the world, mostly in the United States. In the 1950s, the United States was going to decarbonize itself. They didn't want to use coal, they didn't want to use oil, they wanted to use nuclear power. This is 70 years ago. Imagine where we would be today had we invested in that. Imagine where the technology would be today. Except the Green Movement killed it in the 1960s, right? The United States went from nuclear going to being the largest nuclear builder of technologies in the early 1960s. And by the end of the 1960s, all of those nuclear plants and facilities had been replaced by what? Coal. United States became the largest consumer of coal. When we think about solutions, I don't want to stand up here and just talk about problems, because our industry is not about problems. I've thrown out a challenge here. A challenge as far as what is reality? Where do we need to be? How does this best serve us where we need to be? These are numbers from the United States. I'm using these numbers not because I'm trying to be the ugly American, but because the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States has easier numbers to access than the European Union's environmental policies. That sometimes they contradict depending, because they have to go country by country. So I'm using the EPA. I would imagine that the EU would be within 1% difference of the United States. They're two very similar economies, chemical structures, thermodynamics, and so forth of energy. The chemical industry makes up 3% of CO2 emissions. 3% of CO2 emissions in the United States. 4% are coming from flatulating livestock. That's cows and pigs that are farting. Our 3% in the chemical industry enable these upper areas of transportation, insulation, industry, building materials, from the farm to the fork, the supply chain, nitrogenous fertilizers, which feed half of the world's population, the ability to have cold storage so that food doesn't rot. Many of the developing world today, more food rots from the field to the consumer than from the consumer in the final phase of production, packaging, and consumption. If we had more cold storage, better, more efficient transportation around the world, we'd actually be improving a great means of food production and conservation. We think about, this is just Huntsman, and I obviously am very biased about the company Huntsman, but if I were to look at BASF, if I look at Dow Chemical, if I look at Covestro, if I look at any of our competitors, they're doing basically the same thing as we are. I think we maybe have a little bit better people than they do, but I'm not going to get into that. So the chemistry is largely the same. And we look at our divisions and we start looking at the solutions. Think of the solutions. The cleanest barrel of oil will be that barrel of oil that is not used, that is not consumed. And when we look at that, it is the chemical industry that is going to be the solution provider for this. This is an industry that ought to be promoted as a solution. We think about lightweighting, we think about high performance insulation, smart grids, power grids, wind, solar, aerospace industries, technologies and so forth. This is all coming from our industry. We think about the food chain, the pharmaceutical industry, think about electrical distribution, the efficiencies of that. It comes from our industry. We think about battery technology and the chemistry, the ability to process the ores and so forth. It's coming from our industry. Our industry is a solution provider, and we have plenty to go on it. We think about the next couple of years as what's coming. Huntsman's invested millions of dollars into nanotube technology. The ability to take stranded methane. This is not a technology 10 years in the future. This is a technology that is here today. It's commercialized, it's working, and our objective is to make it more competitive, lower the costs so that we can widen the distribution. Again, there are other companies that are doing these things. This is not just a promotion for Huntsman, but here we have a technology, starts with stranded methane. The byproduct is a nanotube technology, 25 times stronger than steel. And the byproduct, pure hydrogen. Pure hydrogen. Our raw materials is a product right now that's being burned into the atmosphere. When we think about this, this is a chemical operation. This is typical of what is great about our industry, of what our industry is capable of doing. What has our industry allowed us to do? This is a GDP over the last 100 years. The growth of the GDP just in the United States, somewhere about the time when Jimmy Page and Robert Plant were writing the greatest rock anthem of all time, Stairway to Heaven, the United States economy hit $1 trillion. Right here, early 1970s. Since then, the United States economy has grown, depending on which currency you use and who you believe, on a non-inflation adjusted basis, the United States economy has grown 25 times over. And I look at the amount of CO2 that the United States economy generates. This is 1970 to where we are today. Look at that. From the 1970s, late 1970s to where we are today, basically flat. The economy has grown 25 times over. CO2 emissions have stayed relatively flat. Now, people would say, well, you're not producing as much steel. Yes, we are. There's many cars that are being produced today. It's the efficiencies that are coming by lightweighting, by insulation, by the elimination of coal and the replacement of natural gas, by fracking technologies, by taking innovation, by taking technology, by taking material sciences and applying it to society. When we look at this on a per capita basis, now think about this for a moment. Here's where we are today in the United States. Again, Europe, I'd say, is very similar to this. Here we are in the United States in the end of 2022. Here we are 100 years later. 100 years earlier, 100 years ago. Your carbon footprint today, if you're living in the United States or in Europe, your carbon footprint today is the same, roughly, as an individual that was living 100 years ago. And think how much more electricity, how much more power, how much more consumption, everything you are doing today versus that person of 100 years ago. This is innovation. This is technological advancement. This is what is being displayed here at JEC. This is about a cleaner society and a better society, a more prosperous society. And our industry is going to play a vital role and has played a vital role. We should be celebrating the successes that our industry has been a part of. And as I look out over the next 10 to 15 years, Europe is going to be continuing to go through a massive industrial transformation. But as I look at lightweighting, energy conservation, as I look at the chip industry, I look at aerospace, as I look at the lightweighting of the automotive industry and so forth, composites are going to be key to that. Technological advancements are going to be key to that. But we must have a sound energy policy. It starts with a competitive energy sourcing and electrical manufacturing, without which Europe will lose its competitiveness. Europe will lose its industry. And I think the world is in a much worse place if that happens. So I, for one, hope that I can be a loud voice and hoping that there'll be some monicum of sanity that will come to a policy that will both encourage investment, that will both encourage innovation, education into these areas, and at the same time, we'll be able to have an industrial base in Europe where we're able to have proper regulation, proper oversight, proper environmental stewardship, and the correct labor practices that will benefit society. And will allow future societies of our children, my grandchildren, to be able to grow up and look at the investments that we made in our day, in our time, and thank us for what we've done, because we're actually heading in the right direction here. Thank you very much. I think we have just a few minutes if there are any questions or comments that anybody might have. Hopefully I've still maybe somebody disagrees with something. Questions, comments? Nothing at all. Put everybody to sleep. Okay, well, if there are none, I'm going to let you go 2 minutes and 38 seconds early. So thank you all very much. And those of you that are buying from us as a company, thank you very much for supporting our company, our efforts. Those of you that are not buying from Huntsman, Harold Wiedemann is right here on the front row. He's our Vice President of our European operations. Love to speak with you. And thank you very much for your time.